So you've got a brilliant offer, a sparkly slide deck, and a dream of people throwing credit cards at you mid-Zoom. But is a webinar really the launch magic you've been promised? In this episode, we're peeling back the curtain on webinar launches, when they work, when they flop, and how to know if they're actually right for you. We'll walk through the pros and cons of what to consider before you hit go live and how to craft a webinar outline that doesn't just educate, but also converts. If you've ever wondered, should I do a webinar or is this just launch peer pressure? This episode is your decision-making cheat sheet. Being an online business owner is full of ups and downs. Some days you can't imagine going back to your 9-to-5, and other days you want to burn your whole business to the ground. We get it.
Welcome to Chaos to Conversions, a podcast of practical, no BS strategies to grow your online business. Each week, we're chatting about launching, copywriting, mindset, and more, so you can make sense of the chaos and do more of what works.
Join the conversation and let's grow together. Welcome to the fourth episode of the Launch Your Way series, where I've been breaking down different launch styles so you can figure out which launch style you should try next for your audience and business. So this week is all about webinar launches, and there are some definite pros and cons of webinar launches. I feel like I should also mention before we dive in, some people would consider a webinar like, I don't know, a little bit of an outdated term. So you might hear a lot of people call them master classes or just like free trainings. Either way, they're likely talking about a webinar style launch. They might just be like avoiding using the word webinar. So there are quite a few benefits to using a webinar style or a masterclass style launch. Now, it might not feel like it, but believe it or not, it is honestly easier, like way easier to put together than a challenge. Because with a challenge, not only do you need to be considering what different action steps you might have to keep people accountable at the end of the day, but also you're likely using a pop-up Facebook group, and there's a ton of kind of other content that you'll need to put together, daily emails, to get people to watch the videos or to come to the live trainings. There's a lot of other content that you'll need to come up with that goes into creating a challenge launch rather than a webinar. So a webinar, really all you're going to need, I say all like it's nothing. I mean, it's still a launch, but really all that you'll need are some invite emails, reminder emails to remind people to show up and actually attend your live webinar. And then, of course, you'll need whatever other content you're putting out before that to warm up your audience. But once you actually get to the webinar itself, you're not needing like a lot of content within your launch event, like those daily emails, like those challenge steps, like the content for a pop-up Facebook group, if that would be something that you would be doing. But usually, I mean, you can totally have a pop-up Facebook group with a webinar as well. We're going to talk about that a little bit more in a couple weeks with some of the launch bonuses. But overall, a webinar is going to require less content during your actual launch. Other great things about webinars is if your audience is fairly warm already, it is perfect because webinars are really great for warm audiences. They don't have as long of a time frame because you're only usually teaching for about 45 to 90 minutes. So it will require a little bit of a quicker conversion, but if your audience is pretty engaged already, it can be a great option or a great solution for you. That live interaction is also going to bring a stronger connection to your audience, like the Q&A, going back and forth, answering their questions in real time. Once you get the hang of a live webinar, or you find a live webinar that is the content's really resonating with your audience and people are signing up for this topic, once you figure out like exactly what your webinar topic should be to sell your program, it can be considered kind of a fairly low lift because you already got the slide deck. You just basically need to show up and go live. But it can take some trial and error at the beginning to figure out like what is the right topic, the cadence of the webinar, what you should actually be teaching about. Now, once you have decided to do a webinar, I feel like we should at least highlight some of the maybe scarier parts or some drawbacks, because a webinar is, if you are having a pretty cold audience, or your audience is not that engaged, or maybe you have a large amount of people coming from ad traffic, you might have a little bit of a tougher time converting with a webinar, because like I said earlier, for a pro, if your audience is really engaged, you do only have 45 to 90 minutes. So if your audience doesn't know you very well, if they're not trusting you just yet, you might have a harder time converting them. Obviously, also, if you don't like to go live and you really, really hate going live and you just feel like you're going to fumble and flop around, then a webinar, yes, might not be for you. Now, I would still challenge yourself to consider going live for a webinar and at least trying it once, even if you feel like you might flop around. There's kind of only one way to find out. And I know that that sounds scary, but webinars can be a very powerful launch strategy. Okay, now that we've talked about some of the pros and cons with selecting or choosing a webinar launch for your program, there are some questions I want you to ask yourself and think about if you're getting mostly yeses for these or mostly no's. Okay, so first question to think of to ask yourself: is your offer more so educational, informational, not necessarily like a how to exactly step by step thing? That was question one. Question two: do you launch your offer multiple times a year? Like maybe you launch it quarterly or like 2 or 3 times a year. Do you launch it multiple times a year? Yes or no? Number three, are you willing to go live in front of an audience on Zoom, Demio, Easy Webinar, some other webinar type of software? And number four, is your audience already kind of warmed up, aware of you, maybe aware of your solution, and kind of maybe dancing around what you already have been selling with this program? So if you answered mostly yeses, webinars could definitely be a solid fit for you. If you're more educational, you are doing this multiple times a year, so you don't need like a big, giant, massive, launch, getting as many people as possible over a really long period of time. Obviously, being willing to go live is a huge help if you want to select a webinar. And like I mentioned earlier, it is a little bit better for audiences that are already warm. So if your offer, your program is proven and you want to get more eyeballs to your sales page, choosing a webinar launch method could be very helpful for you. But I would also say, though, it can be good if your audience is already warm to test a new offer as well. So I don't want you to shy away from a webinar launch if you are releasing or launching a brand new offer. The only time I want you to think about maybe considering a different launch style, maybe like a challenge or a 3-day series, is if you have pivoted your audiences and your audience is not as warm. So if you've got a warm audience, it shouldn't really matter too much if they're pretty engaged and responsive. It shouldn't matter too much if your offer is something new that you are launching or if it's something that is proven. The key there is kind of the audience piece, because with a webinar, like I've mentioned, you don't have a huge amount of time to warm them up. Now, that's not saying never try a webinar if you feel like your list isn't that engaged. Just make sure you have a great nurture sequence on the back end once they sign up for your live training, telling them what to expect and who you are, and building trust in you and your teaching method. But webinars can be great, like I mentioned as well, if you have that time and that energy for that live delivery and the live Q&A. It can be really helpful to connect with your audience on that kind of level. So here is just kind of a very quick high level type of outline for what I would make sure you are including within your live webinar. So you can totally swipe this outline, pause me and grab a pen or a pencil, because I'm literally going to give you like the 7 steps that kind of go through what you should be including in a webinar. So obviously you want to welcome them and go over like what to kind of expect from this webinar, the promise that you're going to be delivering, what you're going to be talking about. Then you want to make sure that within the first 5 minutes or so, your audience is 100% sure that they are in the right place, that you're meeting them where they are. You are talking about the top beliefs that they have about themselves, the mistakes that they've been making. You are using phrases like, this is for you if you've ever X, Y, or Z, something really specific that maybe they've done or they've been trying and it's not, it hasn't worked out for them, but don't worry, because you're here to show them another way that might be better for their problem and fix their problem and lead them to a solution. So we've made them feel like they're in the right place. We've talked about mistakes they're making, beliefs they might have about themselves, and now we're getting into the actual teaching content. Now, this is where I have seen, especially with some of the webinars I've been reviewing in the Launch Reno, some people are giving away way too much information, which I know it is so hard to not give away the farm, because you just want to be like helpful to people and make sure that they're also not leaving your webinar going, well, that was like a load of fluff. So when though we are doing the teaching content, which is going to be like, yeah, it's going to be the meatiest part of your webinar, we don't want to give them the exact whole how to do this formula. We want to give them the framework. We want to talk about what they should be doing and giving them a win here and there. But you definitely don't want to explain every single aspect of how to do whatever it is that you are teaching within your course, your group program, every detail of what you're giving away in your membership. We want to instead focus mainly on the why this has been happening for them, and here is what they can do differently. And we're holding back as much as possible. We're holding back the how of how to do it, because if you teach all that in the webinar, the fear is they might walk away going, oh, well, I got what I needed and thank you so much, and now I don't need anything else from you. So really take a look at making sure you're not explaining away the exact details of how to do whatever it is that you're teaching. Finally, we will then transition into offering your program, why it helps with the problem that they just saw that we were just talking about, how it can be a further solution for them when they want to go a step beyond all of the free content that you just taught them, if they really want to dive into the how to do these specific things that you were talking about, showing them how your offer can be the solution for them. I would also, during a launch period, really consider adding on some bonuses and some urgency. Now, this could be with something like a fast action bonus that maybe you're offering a different like template or extra one-on-one help. If it's something that they are purchasing like while they're live with you on the webinar, that's called a fast action bonus. Maybe you are offering something a little bit different for a little bit longer of a time, maybe for the first 48 hours or 72 hours after the webinar, just to increase that little urgency and give them a little bit something extra. I also usually recommend changing out, if possible, your bonus stack and maybe trying some different things for different launch periods to test what works with your audience. Think about what they might need or want, what might help them, kind of get off the fence and actually purchase. And then finally, I would definitely make sure that you are ending with enough time to do a Q&A, or at least at the very least answer some FAQs that your audience might have. Now, while you're doing that, though, make sure that they are still able to join your program at any time by having a clickable link in the chat or having the sales page URL displayed while you're answering questions. Now, as far as how to measure that your webinar is performing well, Once you get at least 100 people, if possible, registered, that's just kind of like a nice benchmark number. But you can sort of think about this even if you don't have 100 people registered. You want to make sure at least 20% of those people are showing up. So I'm using 100 because remember the time I taught history, not math. This is the easiest math for me to do in my head. So if you've got 100 people registered, you want at least 20 of them hopefully showing up to the live. If you've less than 20, you might want to think about ways that you can encourage people via email reminders, calendar invite ads to show up live and on time, of course, would also be helpful. Now, besides just the show up rate, which is kind of the first hurdle or battle to getting people to buy, is getting them there live. So the second thing you want to make sure that you are looking at is the live conversion rate. So the live conversion rate is basically telling you how your pitch is doing and how your webinar is doing in general. It's the number of people who purchased compared to the number of people who showed up live. And you can expect that number, hopefully, to be also over 20%. Some people say that they have had conversion rates of 60+%. I've personally never seen that working on a webinar. If you've had a webinar conversion of over 60%, please reach out to me because I would love to just talk to you and be in your presence. Usually, though, I have seen most of my clients have webinar conversions of anywhere from 20 to 30%. So going back to that number of 20, right, of the people who showed up. So if we've got 100 people registered, 20 people show up live, that means we can expect 4 or 5 people to purchase on the webinar. Now, that might not seem like a lot, right? But that is basically a great benchmark number. If you've got 100 people registered, 20 people show up live, you can hopefully expect 4 or 5 people to purchase on the webinar. Now, maybe you have some really great, strong follow-up emails. You could expect more purchases later on. We were simply just talking about the live conversion rate for people actually sitting in on the webinar, listening to the Q&A, asking questions, things like that. Thank you so much for hanging out with me today, where we talked all about how live webinars can be great low-lift ways to test new messaging or new offers. Although I would consider doing that with an audience that is already warm and engaged, and maybe consider committing to just 1 or 2 live webinars before you introduce a 4 or 5-part webinar series. To really deliver in this type of launch, just like all launch events, make sure you're making your audience feel like they're heard, seen, and that you can help them solve their problem. If you want some help launching your next program with a webinar or maybe another launch strategy, make sure you are getting on the waitlist for the Launch Reno program for the next time it opens. The link is in the show notes. Thanks so much for stopping by to hang out with me today. If you want to learn more about how we can work together on a launch strategy or grab a freebie or one of the resources I mentioned, head over to duxburydigital.co/resources. I'll be back here next Tuesday for more practical strategies to take your business from chaos to conversions.